Hello, I'm Eleanor Payne, and I'd like to read you another one of my stories. This one's a little hard to categorize. It could be science fiction, fantasy, or something else, depending on how you want to interpret it. This story is set in the world of business travel, and in my career I've been to a lot of places and stayed in a lot of hotels. Although the story is told in the first person, the narrator is not me, and it is in no way autobiographical, except that the initial idea literally came to me in a dream while I was on a business trip. On the flight home, I expanded the story and finished writing the first draft in just a few hours. This story isn't included in my published work, but I hope you'll take a look at those on my Amazon page, especially my novel, A Suggestion in Space, which has been published by Fantastic Books Publishing. And now, Spring Flower. If you can remember the 60s, someone told me once, you weren't really there. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, I was too young in the 60s for Woodstock, the first Isle of Wight festival, and all that sex, drugs and rock and roll. I didn't do that sort of stuff in the 70s either. Well, maybe a bit, but certainly not enough to confuse my mind the way it's been confused recently. I'd never really got on with girls at school, so when I went to university, I was set on having a wild time, sowing lots of wild oats, but only 1 week in, I met Lorraine and we embarked on a passionate, beautiful, but very safe relationship. A year after graduation, we were happily married with good jobs and a child on the way. Today, we're happily married with good jobs and a grandchild on the way. Of course, we slept together at university, but we were both first-timers and I never even thought of cheating on her. Until last week, that is. I travel a lot with my work, so I'm often found sitting alone at a table in a hotel restaurant, while other tables are occupied by equally lonely people. Surely it would be better, I thought, if all the lone travellers could get together, and then we'd have a much more enjoyable time. And as I thought this, I noticed the young woman at the table next to mine, looking at me very intently. "It's Graham, isn't it?" she said. "That's right," I said. "I'm sorry, I don't remember who you are." "It's Quince," she said. "We were in the same class at school." I couldn't help sounding a little sarcastic. "If we were at school together, then you must have found a fountain of youth or have the best plastic surgeon ever. You don't look more than about 25. "That's nice of you," she said, "but what's age got to do with anything these days?" I couldn't think of an answer to that, so I said, "Quince, that's a funny name." My full name is Maud Quince, but I hated my first name so much I always used my surname. She leaned over from her table, touched me on the arm, and looked me straight in the eye. I caught a whiff of perfume, the sort of perfume that makes you hold your breath so that it lingers a little longer in your nose. "Surely you remember," she said. Now up to that moment I would have sworn in court that I'd never known anyone at school called Maud Quince. It would surely be impossible to forget someone with such an unusual name. But if someone says something to you, however unlikely, with enough conviction, then you start to believe it. "You know I had a huge crush on you when we were at school," she said. "I even slipped a note into your jacket pocket once, when you left it hanging on the back of a chair." Needless to say, I had no memory of ever finding such a piece of paper. But once she said it, the words went round inside my head until they made such an impression that I almost started to believe it. We talked some more, and she seemed to know about me and what I'd done at school, but some people, like fake spirit mediums, are very skillful at figuring out what you're thinking and leading out information that they then give back to you as though they already knew it. At the time she was totally engaging, and when she moved to my table and sat close to me, her perfume was overwhelming. Not in the sense of being overpowering, but just so evocative, reminding me of a lost, wild youth that I'd never had. We moved to the bar and talked some more, and although I knew deep down that her story of having a crush on me at school was ridiculous, another part of me was so desperate to believe it that in a way that I now can't explain, I really thought that it was true. And if you have enough faith in something, doesn't that make it true? Why didn't you come up to my room in about 10 minutes, she said. The number's 402. At this point, a quiet alarm bell went off in my head, when what I needed was a deafening one. When we got to the room, she'd asked me for money, I thought, or I'd discover that everything, including our conversation so far, was being broadcast via webcams, and I'd soon be viral on the internet. Or big men with cameras would leap into the room just as things started to get interesting, blackmail me to prevent my wife finding out, and then beat me up for good measure. But for all these doubts whispering in my head, when they should have been shouting, I agreed without hesitating, flattered that I was the object of desire of such a good-looking and pleasant young woman. I knocked on the door of room 402, and a few seconds later it opened. She was wearing a cheesecloth top with embroidery round the neck. Her pretty face was subtly made up, and her long blonde hair fell across her shoulders, a magical vision of the 70s. She eagerly kissed me on the lips, and I responded, captivated by her body and scent. "I'm just going to the bathroom for a moment," she said, and she went in, locking the door behind her. I was surprised to hear her start running the shower, and 15 minutes later it was still running. "Quince, are you all right in there?" There was no reply. "Can you hear me?" I didn't know what I'd find when I opened the lock from the outside with a coin. Perhaps she'd slipped in the shower and was lying in a pool of blood, or she was just keeping quiet to play a trick on me. The shock of finding the room empty is hard to describe. I felt dizzy and nauseous, disbelieving and broken-hearted that she'd gone. I felt all the walls, but they were fully tiled with only a small ventilation hole in the ceiling and an access panel next to the shower. It was firmly screwed in from the outside. It was too small for even the lithesome Quince to squeeze through. What was she? A ghost? An hallucination? But even the most convincing hallucinations can't open a locked door or turn on a shower. I looked around the bedroom. It was clean, with no luggage, no sign anyone had been there. I left quickly, feeling guilty and confused. I hadn't been unfaithful to my wife, but I'd wanted to, and would have done so if Quince hadn't disappeared. Sometimes the intention is bad as a crime. At home we have a big old wardrobe where we keep all sorts of junk that we should have thrown away years ago. While I was looking for something else, I noticed an old bottle of perfume at the back of a shelf. It was labelled Spring Flower, a fresh fragrance for today's woman. Written above, a wispy line drawing of a long-haired girl sitting in a field of flowers with a branch of blossom floating over her head. I jumped when I heard my wife moving on the landing. "Lorraine," I said, forcing myself to sound as natural as possible, "is this perfume yours? I don't remember seeing it before." "Oh, that stuff," she said, coming into the room. "Someone gave it to me once as a present. I think the last time I wore it was before we met. I don't know why I'm still keeping it. It's been out of fashion for about 30 years. And she went out again. I tried a bit of the perfume on the back of my hand. The smell was old and faded, but unmistakable. My heart and breathing sprang to twice their normal rate. It was her. I could almost feel Quince in the room with me. On an impulse, I started rummaging through a shoebox labelled Graham Old Papers, and right at the bottom was a faded scrap torn out of a school exercise book. Written on it in neat blue ink were the words, "Hi, Graham. Love from Quince. Kisses."